what we inherit from our family, a lot of times there's a lot of things that we have no control over. And so in motherhood, this can become apparent by us looking and seeing ourselves in our kids or seeing other family members in our kids. When we are approaching our parenthood through this deeply rooted pain, a lot of times it can look like overprotection for our kids. Hello and welcome to Mom's Way to Wellness. I am your host, Ida Maravillas. This is a space for moms who are in every season and in every feeling in motherhood, who are ready to turn pain into healing. Through authentic conversations about motherhood, parenting, and mental health through a lens of faith, you will find practical tools and encouragement to help you grow in every role you carry, building healthier relationships with yourself and with others. Let's dive into today's episode. Welcome to the conversation about identity in motherhood. We're continuing this series as we explore the different ways that moms tend to lose their identities when we come into this role of being mom. And if this is something you're not sure that you can relate to, I want to ask you a few questions. And as you reflect on these questions, I just want to challenge you to consider whether or not you can relate to any of these different areas of the way that our childhood and our different upbringings and different experiences can contribute to the way that our identity is impacted as moms. I'm wondering if you're a mom who struggles with saying no to their children when they ask for something. Are you a mom who thinks a lot about your own experiences when you see that your kid is struggling with something? Are you someone who reflects a lot about your own childhood as you raise your kids? Are you a mom who has a hard time figuring out who you are when you're not working with your kids or doing something with your kids? These are the ways that we could tend to lose ourselves in our role as mom. They're ways that manifest as we go into navigating parenting and different challenges once our kids are here, but we might not really take the time to slow down and recognize them because let's be real. When we have kids, our lives are full, our schedules are busy. And it's not until we start to really experience something hard or something heavy, or our mood is impacted on a daily basis, that we start to realize that something just isn't okay. Something isn't working. Something isn't going well. And so, a lot of times when I am working with moms or having conversations with moms, and this conversation comes up, we have a hard time being able to answer something about what do we enjoy doing? What is it that we like to do that is not connected to a way that we serve others or a way that we are connected to a responsibility or connected to our kids or what our kids are doing in their lives. And so today I really want to talk about four different areas that we can consider to think about how our identities get impacted even before we become moms. Our identities are constantly shifting. And so the first actually I do want to talk about an overview of what the four different areas are and then I'll go over how each of them can look differently as we go into our motherhood. So the four categories are inheritance, trauma, disconnection from God, and role confusion. So, when I talk about inheritance, I want to include experience and our environment in that. And when we think of inheritance, this is something that we receive from our ancestors, from the people who came before us, from our family members. Some of what we inherit from our family members are genetic. We inherit their DNA and we experience whether or not we have curly hair, whether or not we have colored eyes, how fair our skin is. That's something that we inherit that we can't control. But we also inherit some of the different ways that our family is structured. Where are we in the birth order? How do we fit in? How do we belong? How do we feel loved? And so what we inherit from our family, a lot of times there's a lot of things that we have no control over. We're growing up, we're kids, and we don't have access to different resources to be able to understand how we are developing in our family environment, in how it looks socially, how it looks culturally. There's just so many different ways that our inheritance from our families and from our environment can be impacted. And so that's what I'm talking about when I mention inheritance. And so in motherhood, this can become apparent by us looking and seeing ourselves in our kids or seeing other family members in our kids, maybe even comparing them to others within our family unit. Um, this is something that is tricky to see and tricky to recognize. It does require a lot of reflection. And so there's overlap in some of these categories, and I want to go into the second category, which is trauma. And I know that trauma gets a lot of trending news these days, and I will do a future episode on trauma itself. But I want to talk about how this is deeply rooted pain. And, research says that the ACEs study is something that was created to identify different types of childhood pain points that could impact us as adults. And so when you look at the ACEs study, you'll see that a lot of what is asked about has to do with what was experienced in childhood. And so there is overlap in the fact that our childhood is part of our inheritance and what we can't control. But trauma can also happen outside of our family units. We can experience a specific incident as we grow older, as we do develop more resources, as we start to become more of the individuals we think we are going to be, and start to try to figure out our values and our identity. And we see this a lot. Maybe more typically in the teen years, right? When we go and we explore and we challenge and we have angst. I know that that's something I can relate to at least. And so when we are approaching our parenthood through this deeply rooted pain, a lot of times it can look like overprotection for our kids. We can try to control things. We can be the savior in their situation, and we can try to prevent them from having to face the consequences that come with choices that they make or with decisions that they make. We can constantly try to prevent them from experiencing any kind of pain that we experienced in our own childhood. Our next topic is disconnection from God. So, when we look at who we were created to be in relationship with an anchor, with a constant truth. And depending on how we experienced that constant truth growing up, we may have been born into a family unit that didn't practice relationship with God or that had a very religious approach and traditional approach to a relationship with God, a faith aspect that really was filtered through the words that were spoken to us, or whether or not there were kind of like legalistic practices and rules and obedience ways that we needed to behave. And so a lot of times this can manifest in our parenting by looking for belonging or earning love. So we may actually look to belong to our children even though we are older than them. And we're supposed to be coming into this motherhood experience for more experience, which we do have, right? We have more years on this earth, but we also bring everything that we've experienced into this motherhood journey. And so it can look like our kids actually having to learn or earn their love from us, even though we may not even realize that that's the pattern that we're following. So that is how coming into our motherhood, we can lose our identity in that aspect as well from being disconnected from God or being disconnected from the true heart of God. And I do plan to have another upcoming episode on how we are impacted when there is an absent father or a disconnected father. And that can be really confusing too because God is father. The fourth area is when identity becomes replaced by our roles. And we did talk about this a little bit previously, but I want to talk about it a little bit more today. This is when we start to identify our value based on the roles that we walk into, based on the roles that we carry. So we wear a lot of titles. Maybe we are called mom, we are called grandma, we are wife, we are caregiver, we are daughter. We are all these different things in the world, right? And so we start to see that we can't separate who we are from what we do. And so a lot of times with burnout, what happens is we feel like all that matters is what I do. All that matters is what I bring to the table, and I'm tired. And that's because we're not taking care of ourselves. We're not taking care of the needs that we were designed to have. We're not prioritizing our mental health. We're not prioritizing rest. We're not prioritizing movement. We're not prioritizing our well being. Instead, we are sacrificing it because we are elevating this role of mom based on a lot of different things that we've experienced. Because maybe we always wanted to be a mom. Maybe this is a title or a status that is very highly treasured. Maybe the expectation was very high within our family unit. Maybe there was trauma experienced trying to have a baby, trying to carry a pregnancy. Maybe there was coming into motherhood through adoption. And so there was a lot of pain or a lot of exploration. And so motherhood becomes something that we treasure so deeply, and it does require a lot. It does require some level of sacrifice, but we weren't called to necessarily self sacrifice everything that we need to be well, to be fully whole, and to be complete in the way that we walk into these roles. These roles change over time. The way that we function within these roles changes over time. We're not always going to be packing a diaper bag and sleeping based on a newborn sleep schedule. There are going to be different challenges that we face as our kids grow up, right? There are going to be times where our kids are struggling, and it may or may not have to do with us and our household and our parenting. There are going to be so many different ways that our motherhood journey pivots and shifts just like our identities shift. And so these are the four ways that we can lose sight of who we are and start to feel like we're lost in our motherhood. We don't even know who we are anymore. Or maybe we never really knew who we were because maybe we always dreamed of being a mom. Maybe this is something that we longed for because we didn't feel a sense of belonging or safety in one of these four areas as we were growing up. So we knew that we wanted to create something different within our family units. But I want to encourage you today because even though these are four different ways that we can lose sight of who we are when we walk into this role of motherhood, it's not where we have to stay stuck. When it comes to the ways that we can respond to these different areas, I really want to give you a takeaway for each one today. The takeaway for inheritance is that whatever we inherited, whatever we didn't have control over, whatever we didn't have the resources as young kids to be able to overcome, we get to rewrite our stories. We get to take the pen, we get to write the next chapter, we get to decide what our future legacy will be for our generations to come. We don't have to stay stuck in what we inherited. We can change what the inheritance is for our kids. And that might be a lengthy process. That might have to do with going to therapy, seeking help from other people who've gone before us on our journeys that we are on. It might be seeking a mentor, it might be looking for a spiritual community. There might be a lot of different ways that we can do this, but we don't have to stay stuck and claim the words that were spoken to us. We don't have to live in the dysfunction that we grew up around us. We get to decide. We get to decide. The next takeaway I want to talk about is trauma. The takeaway from trauma is that we built something within ourselves to be able to survive. We built something within us to feel safe and to make sure that we were okay as much as we could, especially depending on whatever the situation was and whatever type of trauma you may have experienced, or whatever type of trauma your partner experienced, because our kids don't only inherit what they receive from us as moms, they receive from their dad's side of the family too. And so, what was built to survive can be healed. It's a process, it takes time. There are so many different ways to get there. And I'm glad that there's such a different combination of tools and strategies that we can utilize to be able to come into more of our full and healed versions of ourselves. The next takeaway I want to address is when we feel disconnection from God. When we feel disconnection from God, that is something, thankfully, that can be restored. That is something that can be restored in so many different ways. It could be restored daily. When we fail, His compassions are new every morning. Thankfully, that's a relationship that He is always willing to reconnect with us. It's important for us to know that we are connecting with what God says about Himself and His character, and not what others say or portray, not legalistic approaches, not rules and obedience, not distorted truth, but His truth that's grounded in His word. And so that is one way that we can heal from trauma. And so I want to encourage you to know that there is healing from trauma. And sometimes it is a combination of, restoring that connection from with God, and also being able to find safety in our surroundings despite what our body remembers, being able to soften our approach in different areas of our lives. The takeaway that I want to talk about for our roles, or the way that we start to equate who we are by what we do, is that we can discover who we are beyond our roles. We can discover who we are beyond being mom, beyond cooking dinner, beyond being the Uber driver or the DoorDash person. We can look for the ways that we are interested in different things. We can look for ways that prioritize our own self care and well being and mental health. We can explore the different spiritual gifts that we've received, and we can live by example for our daughters and for our kids what it looks like to be healthy, what it looks like to have a firm foundation of our identity, and not necessarily something that is flexible and changing based on circumstances, because circumstances will change. Yes, there will be shifts in the things that we value, but it doesn't mean that we are worth any less. It doesn't mean that it should impact our level of worth in the way that we carry ourselves and the value that we bring to every situation. And so, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I really encourage you to tune in for the rest of the conversations that we're going to be having on identity. I really appreciate you being here, and I look forward to continuing this conversation with you. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you thought of someone who can use the encouragement that you received from this episode, please share it with them. If you would like to receive the monthly newsletter and insider information about the show, you can sign up to be part of the Mom's Way to Wellness community at idamaravillas.com.